The solicitor set the portrait against the study wall at 10:30 in the morning, and the room went very still. It was not a large portrait. The frame was gilded and old. The paint darkened at the edges, the way oil darkens when a century passes over it without ceremony. A woman looked out from the canvas, with her hands folded at her waist, and her expression composed into the particular stillness of someone who has been told, all her life, to be quiet and be grateful. She wore pale green. Her hair was arranged simply, without the ringlets that fashion demanded. And at the bottom of the frame, barely visible beneath the brass nameplate bearing the name of the late Earl of Stanholt, someone had pressed a folded paper into the gap between canvas and backing, wedged there with the care of a person who expected it never to be found at all. Nora Ashford stood at the threshold of the study door and watched the solicitor's hands tremble as he unfolded the paper. She had not been invited into this room. She was not, technically, a family member any longer. Her sister Cecily was the Countess of Wycliffe now, had been for 11 months, and Nora's place in this house was the ambiguous one that attached itself to a woman who was a guest by courtesy and a stranger by every other measure. She had come only because the footman had looked frightened, and frightened footmen in large houses usually meant something worse than another creditor at the door. The Marquis of Wycliffe stood at the fireplace with his back to the room. Nora had been watching his back for 11 months. She knew its particular tension, the way his shoulders carried their discipline even when no one was looking, or when he believed no one was. She had told herself over and over, with the firmness of a woman who believes repetition is the same as truth, that she did not know what that tension meant, that she had imagined the November evening in the gallery when his eyes had followed her across the room and then looked away too quickly when she turned. That she had misread his voice, the 2 or 3 times it had gentled in her direction, as ordinary courtesy rather than something it was not permitted to be. The solicitor cleared his throat. "My lord," he said, his voice very careful, "I believe you will wish to read this yourself." The Marquis of Wycliffe did not move at once. Then he turned, and Nora watched his face do something it almost never did. It lost its composure for 1 full second, no more, before the mask returned. She had seen it. She had catalogued his face for 11 months without intending to, the way the mind catalogues what the heart cannot name. A strong jaw, a straight nose, dark eyes that gave nothing away. 34 years old, and already carrying the kind of stillness that takes decades to earn. The stillness of a man who had learned that showing what he felt was a transaction he could not afford. He crossed the room and took the paper from the solicitor's hands. He read it twice. Nora knew he read it twice because she counted his eyes moving across the page, and then stopping, and then going back to the beginning, with the flat, deliberate focus of a man who cannot believe what he has understood. He looked up. Not at the solicitor. He looked at Nora. "Miss Ashford," he said, his voice level in the way of a man holding something very heavy with both hands. "I think you had better come in." The Ashford sisters had been described, in the season of their debut, as the practical one and the pretty one. Anyone who had watched them for more than an evening could have told you which was which. Cecily was fair and quick, and moved through a ballroom the way light moves through water, dispersing everywhere at once, and leaving everyone warmed. Nora was darker, quieter, and had the misfortune of genuine intelligence in a room that preferred its women decorative. The practical one, Lady Marrow had said, the night of the Ashford girls' first ball, not troubling to lower her voice, because Nora was standing near the refreshment table and was, to Lady Marrow's particular understanding, furniture. Useful, I suppose. Nothing else to be done with her. Nora had heard it. She had set down her glass of orgeat with perfect steadiness and gone to find her sister. She had been 22 years old, and she had understood, with the clean comprehension of someone who has been told a difficult truth so many times it has ceased to sting, that the season was for Cecily. Cecily, with her ringlets and her laugh and her ability to make a man feel, simply by listening to him, that he was the most interesting person in any room. Cecily, who could turn a conversation about weather into something that felt like intimacy. Cecily, who, by the 4th week of the season, had been singled out by the Marquis of Wycliffe in a way that set every drawing-room in London whispering. Their father, Walter Ashford, had watched it happen from his armchair with the remote satisfaction of a man who had placed a careful bet and seen it run. He was not unkind. He was merely practical in the way that men of limited fortune are practical, which is to say, he had arranged his hopes around the daughter whose prospects were brightest and had trusted the other one would manage. Nora had managed. She was good at managing. She had kept the household account since she was 16. She had read to her father when his eyes failed in the evenings, Greek and Latin and the occasional agricultural pamphlet, working through them with the same composed attentiveness she brought to everything. She had been engaged, very briefly, to a Mr. Fellows of Derbyshire, and had ended it herself when she understood that Mr. Fellows wanted a housekeeper who read Latin and called it a wife. She had not wept over him. She had wept privately, twice over the Marquis of Wycliffe. Once the week after Cecily's engagement was announced, when she had permitted herself one night of understanding exactly what she was losing, a man she had never had and had no right to. Once the morning of the wedding, standing at the back of the church in a gown she had retrimmed with ivory ribbon because it was all the budget would allow. She had not wept since. She had simply come to live at Wycliffe House, because her father had died in January, and the London rooms could not be kept. And Cecily had pressed her to come, and the Marquis had said, his voice careful, that she was welcome. And she had told herself that welcome was enough. The solicitor's name was Mr. Harcastle. He had served the late Earl of Stanholt for 30 years and had the look of a man who had witnessed a great deal of what money does to families and had decided the only dignified response was to become very quiet. He spread the document on the study desk and weighted its corners with the inkwell and the letter seal, and 2 books Nora suspected he had chosen for their gravity rather than their relevance. "The instrument appears genuine, Mr. Harcastle said. "The ink, the paper, the seal. His late lordship's hand, which I know very well. It was written 6 months before his death, and preserved, one assumes, against the possibility of its discovery being required." Nora stood with her hands folded at her waist in the precise posture of the woman in the portrait. She had not planned to stand that way. She noticed it only when the Marquis's gaze moved from the document to her, and then, very briefly, to the painting, and something shifted in his expression. The document stated in summary that the late Earl of Stanholt had divided his personal estate, not in the manner recorded by the official will, which had named the elder daughter Cecily as the sole heir to the entailed properties, but by a private instrument of gift to both daughters equally, with one difference. The country estate of Ashford Grange, 1,200 acres in Wiltshire, the house and its contents and the income from its tenanted farms, was left in trust for Nora Ellen Ashford, the younger daughter, to be released to her on the occasion of her own marriage or upon her 31st birthday, whichever came first. Her father had known. He had known that the season would deliver Cecily, and had quietly arranged that Nora would not be left only on the mercy of a sister's household. He had known, and he had not told her. "Why?" Nora said, and was surprised by her own voice, which came out steady. "Was it behind the portrait?" His lordship. Mr. Harcastle said, had some concern that the instrument might be challenged or suppressed by interested parties. He placed it in a location he trusted would eventually be found when the portrait was cleaned or moved, but not immediately. He wished, I believe, the marriage to have settled before the matter was raised. Whose marriage? Nora said. Mr. Harcastle looked at her with the expression of a man who is trying very hard not to say what he is about to say. Lady Wycliffe's, Miss Ashford. Your sister's. The Marquis set the document down. The estate was your father's personal property, outside the entail, he said. His voice was the one he used for facts, low and without inflection. It does not affect the settlement of this house or this title. Ashford Grange belongs to you. Nora looked at the painting of her father's mother, the composed woman in pale green with her hands folded. She had a sudden, vivid sense that the woman in the portrait had stood in precisely this room, with precisely this expression, and had managed. I see, Nora said. She did not see at all. If you have ever stayed in a house where you were not quite a guest and not quite a member of the household, you will know the particular arithmetic of it, the way you calibrate yourself every morning to take up exactly as much space as you have been allotted, and no more. Nora had become very good at that arithmetic. She ate in the breakfast room when Cecily and the Marquis were not using it. She kept to the library after luncheon, because the library was large and no one needed it in the afternoons. She played the pianoforte in the music room only when she was confident no one would hear, because Cecily had told her once, without cruelty, that her playing was a little sad. She had found, in the 11 months of her residence, exactly 2 places in Wycliffe House where she felt she could breathe without measuring her breath. The first was the kitchen garden, which was private and productive and smelled of rosemary in the mornings. The second was the gallery, which ran the full length of the east wing and contained the collected family portraits of 6 generations of the Wycliffe line. Nora walked it on evenings when Cecily had company and had no need of her, which was most evenings. She had learned, by degrees, the faces of the Marquis's ancestors, the ones who had been cautious and the ones who had been reckless, the ones who had gambled and the ones who had built, and she had tried not to think too carefully about what she was really looking at when she stopped longest at the portraits of his parents. It was in the gallery that he found her, 3 evenings after Mr. Harcastle's visit. She heard him before she saw him. The particular quality of footsteps that belongs to someone who is not trying to move quietly, but is simply a quiet person. She did not turn around. Miss Ashford, he said. My lord. He came to stand beside her. Not close. He stood at the same angle, looking at the same portrait, which was his father in a dark blue coat, with a greyhound at his knee, and an expression that gave nothing away. You have not mentioned the document, he said. There is nothing to mention. It concerns me and not you. It concerns this household. It concerns Ashford Grange, she said, with the precision of someone who has thought about nothing else for 3 days. Which is apparently mine. I have been considering what to do with the information. He was quiet for a moment. Then he asked what her options were as she saw them. She had made a list. She was a person who made lists. I could wait until my 31st birthday, which is 4 years and 3 months distant. I could marry, which requires a candidate. Or I could speak to a solicitor about whether the trust might be converted to an annuity, which would allow me to establish a small independent household without requiring a wedding. You have thought about this carefully. I tend to think carefully about things that affect my situation. He said nothing. She could feel him deciding something, the way you can feel barometric pressure shift before rain. The document changes what I am able to offer you, he said. She turned then, because the sentence had no shape she could understand. I beg your pardon? He was looking at the portrait of his father. His jaw held its carved stillness. His hands were at his sides. He was, she thought, one of the most contained men she had ever stood near. And she had been standing near him for almost a year with the particular sensitivity of a person trying not to notice something. I cannot speak plainly to you in this house, he said. Not while matters stand as they do. She waited. I am asking you, he said very quietly, not to make any decisions about Ashford Grange until I have had the opportunity to speak with you properly. With what object? She said. He turned. His eyes were dark and level, and held something she had practiced not naming. Miss Ashford, he said. Nora. It was the first time he had used her given name. She felt it in her hands before she felt it anywhere else. I am asking you to wait. 6 weeks. No more. She returned to her room and sat at the writing desk for a long time with the candle burning and the paper blank before her. Then she wrote to Mr. Harcastle and told him she would take no action for 6 weeks. Or she did not examine too carefully why she trusted him. The reason she did not examine it was that the examination was dangerous. She knew what was at the bottom of it, had known for 11 months, and had placed a very firm policy against looking directly at it, the way you do not look directly at the sun. Cecily had not, in Nora's honest assessment, been unkind to the Marquis. Cecily was not capable of genuine unkindness. She was, instead, what she had always been, a woman whose attention was warm and fluid and present, entirely present, for as long as she was in a room, and then gone. She moved from drawing room to dinner table to morning call with the quick inconstancy of a hummingbird, brilliant in each flower, and then elsewhere. She had done this with men during the season, and had done it with everyone since. And she had done it, Nora had observed, with the stillness of someone watching an accident approach from a long distance, with the Marquis. He was not a man who handled inconstancy easily. Nora had seen it in small ways. The way his expression went neutral when Cecily changed a plan without mentioning it. The way he ate his dinner in silence on the evenings when she held court at the far end of the table for a visiting party and forgot to look down its length at him. The way he had, twice that autumn, come to stand in the doorway of the library at 9:30 in the evening and looked at Nora with her book and said nothing, and gone away. She had thought he was unhappy. And then immediately she had thought, that is not her business. She had thought he was lonely. And then she had reminded herself she was not permitted to know that. She had thought, on the worst evening of all, the evening in December, when she had looked up from the pianoforte to find him standing in the music room doorway in the dark, with an expression she had no name for, that this was not imaginary. And then she had finished the sonata and wished him a good evening and gone upstairs and not slept. The 6 weeks passed in a changed register. She was not sure he had said anything differently or moved any differently through the house. She was aware of him in a new way, or rather, she was aware of having given herself permission to be aware, which was different from the thing itself only in degree. He found reasons to be in rooms she occupied. Not obtrusively. Not in ways that could be remarked upon. He came to the library twice in the first week and asked her opinion of 2 books, once on estate management and once on a point of Roman history she had been reading. He walked with her in the kitchen garden on a cold afternoon when she had gone out without a wrap, and he had appeared behind her with a wool mantle and set it on her shoulders without asking, just the weight of his hand settling it into place, and then withdrawn them. He walked beside her to church on the Sunday. Cecily had a headache and could not go, and she was acutely aware for the full quarter-mile of frozen lane of the precise distance he maintained and the way that distance was not indifference, but its opposite. He was not declaring himself. He was not transgressing. He was doing something much quieter and more difficult, which was showing her, in the only way available to a man in his position, that she had not been wrong. It was Lady Marrow who brought the matter into the open. Lady Marrow came to call in the 3rd week of March, with her daughter-in-law, and an expression that communicated she had come for a purpose. She sat across from Cecily in the drawing-room and accepted her tea and spoke for 20 minutes on topics that were not her topic, and then she set down her cup with the particular precision of someone preparing to deliver a verdict. "I understand," she said, "that an old document has come to light regarding the Ashford estate." Cecily looked at Nora. Nora looked at her hands. "Mr. Harcastle has been very discreet," Lady Marrow continued, "but these things do travel. What I am given to understand is that the younger Miss Ashford is to inherit a property in Wiltshire, which puts her in quite a different position than anyone appreciated at the time of your marriage, Lady Wycliffe." She paused. "It is a pity it was not known sooner. One might almost say the wrong arrangement was made." The room was very quiet. "I wonder," Lady Marrow said, in the tone of a woman who does not wonder at all. "What is to be done about it?" "Nothing is to be done about it," Cecily said pleasantly. "Nora is very happy here." Lady Marrow looked at Nora. The look was the same look as the refreshment table 11 years ago, measuring and dismissing, and somehow satisfied. "Happy," she said. "Yes, I suppose she must be." She departed 20 minutes later. Cecily watched her carriage turn at the gate and then turned to Nora with a smile that was perfectly warm and perfectly absent. "She is dreadful," Cecily said. "Pay her no mind." Nora said she would not. The thing that no one in the drawing-room had said was the thing that every person in the house was now saying in their own way, in the small economies of looks and silences and loaded words. The thing was that Walter Ashford, when he had considered which of his daughters to settle in which manner, had perhaps not known what either of his daughters would become. A man who had known his younger daughter well enough to hide a document behind a portrait for her to find, one day might have understood something that the season, in its aggregate wisdom, had not. Nora understood it. She understood it the way you understand a sentence you have been reading for years the moment someone explains that you have been misplacing the emphasis. Not new information. The same information, heard correctly for the first time. She understood it in the kitchen garden at dawn on the morning of the 32nd day, when she had gone out early because she could not sleep and had found the Marquis already there, standing at the far end among the rosemary with his coat on over his nightshirt, and his hair unpinned, and an expression she had not seen before, which was simply tiredness, the tiredness of a man who had not been sleeping either. He saw her. He did not look away. "I could not sleep," she said. "Nor could I," he said. They stood in the cold garden with the early light coming gray over the wall and the smell of frost and rosemary between them, and neither of them spoke for a long time. Then he said, carefully, and with his eyes on the gravel at his feet, "When I married Cecily, I believed what I was supposed to believe, that the match was correct, that correctness would become feeling, that I would learn to be content." She did not answer. "I was wrong," he said, "in every part of that belief." Still she did not answer. Her hands were at her sides. She could feel her heartbeat in her throat. "I am asking you," he said, "to understand that I am not speaking now to the woman with the Wiltshire property. I am speaking to the woman who reads Latin at 9:30 in the library. The woman who retrimmed a gown with ivory ribbon and said nothing about it. The woman who told Mrs. Pemberton's footman, when he was being berated in the hall, that he had done nothing wrong, and she would say so to anyone who wished to hear it." He looked up. "I have been watching you for 11 months, Nora. Not as I should not have done, or not only as I should not have done, I have been watching you the way you watch something you are trying to understand, because you need to understand it in order to know what to do next," she said very quietly. "And what do you need to do next?" "That," he said, "is what I cannot tell you inside this house. Not while matters stand as they do." She understood him. She understood him entirely. And the understanding went through her like cold water. Which is to say, it was clarifying, rather than pleasant. She returned inside and went upstairs and dressed and sat at the writing desk again. This time she did not leave the paper blank. The letter she wrote was to Mr. Hardcastle, a specific question of law, carefully worded, about what was and was not possible under the terms of the will and the circumstances of the estate. Mr. Hardcastle's reply arrived in 4 days. It was careful and exact, and answered her question without expressing an opinion on it. She read it twice. Then she put it in the drawer of the writing desk and locked it, and went downstairs to find Cecily. Cecily was in the morning room with her embroidery, and 3 letters she had received, and not opened, and a pot of chocolate gone cold at her elbow. She looked up when Nora came in and smiled with the warmth she deployed without thinking, the warmth that was entirely genuine and entirely insufficient. "I need to speak with you," Nora said. Cecily put down the embroidery. She was 26 years old and very beautiful, and had the look, beneath the warmth, of a woman who had been slightly bored for 11 months without quite understanding why. Nora told her about the letter from Mr. Hardcastle, not the one she had sent, but the one she had received, and what it contained. And then she told her, as plainly as she could, and with the composure that was the only thing the season had ever considered in her favor, what the Marquis had said in the kitchen garden. Cecily was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "He said that." "Yes." Another silence. Then she said quietly, "I know he is not happy, Nora. I have known for some time." She looked at the cold chocolate. "I'm not very happy either. I did not expect that. I thought I would be. I know. I find it very difficult," Cecily said, with an honesty that was, Nora thought, genuinely her best quality when she permitted herself it, to be what he needs. He is so still, and I am not still. I have never been still. "I know," Nora said again. They sat together for a while in the morning room, the 2 Ashford sisters, and the light came through the window, and the fire burned low, and neither of them said anything else for a time that was, in its way, a form of kindness to each other. The legal matter was not simple. Nora had known it would not be. Mr. Hardcastle had been forthright about the difficulty, about the process required, about the minimum of 2 years that the proceedings would demand, and the necessity of a private bill and the attention it would attract. He had also been clear about what was possible, given the particular nature of Cecily's situation and the particular provisions of the will and the particular strange way that all of it had arrived together at once. The Marquis engaged his own solicitor, and then, quietly, a second one. The proceedings did not begin in that season, but in the next. They were conducted with the discretion that money makes available to those who have it, which meant they were conducted without the kind of public exposure that would have made any of it crueler. Lady Marrow heard about it, because Lady Marrow heard about everything, and she came to call a second time and was received by the Marquis himself in the study, which was unusual, and she departed 40 minutes later, with an expression Nora did not see, because she was in the library with her book, and the afternoon light coming through the south windows, and a pot of tea growing cold at her elbow, much as Cecily's chocolate had grown cold on the morning they had sat together in the morning room. Nora thought about that morning sometimes, in the long middle months when the legal proceedings were moving and the house had found a new and somewhat easier equilibrium. Cecily had spent the spring in Bath with their cousin Mrs. Aldham, and her letters were warmer than they had been, and lighter. And she wrote about a Colonel Fairfax she had met at the assembly rooms with the particular energy of a woman who has encountered someone who finds her inconstancy charming rather than bewildering. The house, with Cecily absent, was quieter. It was not an unhappy quiet. Nora worked in the library in the mornings and walked in the kitchen garden in the afternoons, and ate her dinner at the small table in the morning room. And if the Marquis sometimes ate there as well, rather than at the long dining table that seated 30, it was not remarked upon by anyone, because the household had understood, without being told, that certain things were in the process of becoming different. He was, in those months, the person she had suspected him of being since November. Steady and precise, and capable of a dry wit that emerged only in the context of private conversation. A wit she thought he had suppressed for so long that he had forgotten he possessed it. He knew more Latin than she had expected, and held opinions on agricultural improvement that were grounded and specific. And when she made a point he disagreed with, he said so directly, rather than softening it, which she found, after years of men who softened everything aimed at women, unexpectedly pleasant. He had a son. She had known this, in the abstract, but had not known it in the particular until the boy was brought from his school in Shropshire in July, a thin and serious child of 8 named Philip, who had his father's dark eyes and the look of someone who has learned not to expect warmth, and is therefore very carefully guarded around it. Philip came to the library on his second day at Wycliffe House, ostensibly to find a book on natural history. He stood in the doorway for a moment, measuring her. "My governess says you speak Latin," he said. "I do," Nora said. "My Latin master says it is not useful for women." "Your Latin master," Nora said with the directness she did not trouble to suppress with children, "is incorrect. Latin is useful for anyone who wishes to read accurately. Would you like me to show you?" Philip came into the library. He returned the following morning, and the morning after that. By the 4th day, he was sitting in the chair across from hers, with a text he had found himself, asking her to construe a passage. And the guardedness had dropped enough that when she made a mistake, deliberately, to see what he would do, he corrected her without ceremony. His father, passing the doorway that afternoon, had stopped and looked in at the two of them bent over the book, and his expression was the one Nora was gradually learning to read, the one that lived beneath the mask and had no name for itself yet. The autumn brought the proceedings toward their close and brought a new question with it, which was the question of where Nora would go when matters were formally concluded. The house in London had never been re-established. Cecily was in Bath still, the letters from Bath having taken on a particular character. Ashford Grange existed, in Wiltshire, waiting to be either claimed or converted, and the Marquis, on a cold morning in October when the frost was on the kitchen garden and Nora had come out early and found him there among the rosemary again. "Mr. Harcastle expects the final matter to be concluded in 6 weeks, he said. "Yes," she said. "He wrote to me as well." He did not say anything for a moment. She watched his breath make a small cloud in the cold air. Then he said, "There are things I need to say to you that I have not been able to say." "I know." "Not yet. 6 weeks more." He paused, and something shifted in his expression, something that was not quite a smile but occupied the territory adjacent to one. "I have not been uncertain. Not since the kitchen garden." She turned to look at him fully. 35 years old now, slightly more worn at the edges, and the mask was not perfectly in place. It never was, entirely, when they were alone. "I have not been uncertain either," she said, "since rather earlier than that." The expression that crossed his face was not one she had a name for yet. She thought she would have time to learn it. The season made its usual noise about the matter when it finally could be avoided no longer. Lady Marrow had several things to say, and said all of them in drawing rooms across London, with the confidence of a woman who is always right, and the assurance that being right is the same as being kind. "The practical one," she told Mrs. Dalton at a dinner in May, not troubling to lower her voice, as was her established habit. "We all said at the time there was nothing else to be done with her. And now look, it is enough to make one question everything." She did not sound as though she was questioning anything at all. The engagement was announced in June, at a dinner at Wycliffe House. It was announced at a dinner not because the Marquis had planned it that way, but because it was the first occasion on which the relevant people were gathered, including Mr. Harcastle and the Marquis's cousin Lord Edmund Wycliffe, and 3 of Cecily's particular friends, who had, to their credit, been more generous than the season deserved, and who Nora suspected would be genuinely glad. Cecily was at the far end of the table. She looked lighter than she had in many months. She had come down from Bath with a color in her face that was new, and something in her expression that was not yet settled, but was beginning to be. The Marquis stood at the head of the table. He was not a man who made speeches. He said very little, in fact. He said, "I am engaged to Miss Nora Ashford, and I am grateful for your goodwill." It was 11 words. They were specific and irrevocable, and he delivered them looking down the table at Nora, and not at the room. The room, to its credit, recognized a fact when it was presented with one. Philip, who had been permitted to dine at the table for the occasion on account of his age and the size of the party being smaller than usual, looked across at Nora and then back at his plate with the expression of a child who is working through an equation and has arrived at a satisfactory solution. He cut his roast lamb with great deliberateness and said nothing, which, in Philip, was the equivalent of a declaration. Lady Marrow was not at the dinner. She heard about it from Mrs. Dalton the following morning, and was reported to have set down her teacup with somewhat more force than the occasion required. Whatever she said after that was absorbed by the general opinion of the season, which had, as it always did eventually, adjusted itself to the new arrangement, and decided it had seen this coming. The season had not seen it coming. The season had said there was nothing else to be done with her. The season, Nora thought, had a great deal to answer for in the matter of what it decided to see and what it decided to overlook. Nora had been managing for a long time. She had managed without assistance, without prospect, without anyone troubling to look too carefully at what she was doing, or why. She had retrimmed gowns and kept accounts, and read Latin, and declined a man who wanted a housekeeper, and she had stood in a church in a gown with ivory ribbon, and not wept. She had arrived in a house where she was neither guest nor member, and learned its distances and calibrated herself to them every morning for 11 months. She had also, without entirely intending to, become known to every servant in Wycliffe House by name, and had learned the names of their children, and had intervened twice on behalf of a housemaid who was being poorly treated by an upper servant, and had said what needed to be said with the directness that only the people who have nothing social to lose can afford. None of this had been strategy. None of it had been performed. It had simply been who she was, persisting, the way things persist when they are genuinely rooted. The gardener, Mr. Crisp, gave her a cutting of the kitchen garden rosemary when the engagement was announced. He brought it to the door of the library on a Tuesday morning, wrapped in a damp cloth, and said it would take in a pot over the winter. She thanked him and took the cutting upstairs and set it in the south window of her room and watered it. It did take, just as he had promised. They were married in September, in the church at the end of the Wycliffe Lane, on a morning when the light was the particular gold of early autumn, and the rooks were quiet, and the elm trees had just begun to turn. The church was small, and the occasion was not large. Cecily stood near the front with a smile that was warmer than the season would have predicted, and Mr. Hardcastle sat in the back row with his hat on his knee, and the look of a man who has finally finished a long and difficult piece of work to his satisfaction. Philip sat in the second pew with his back very straight, and his new coat still, and his expression composed into a careful dignity that his father would have recognized if his father had been watching anyone other than Nora. The Marquis's hand was warm through her glove. He did not look at the altar. He looked at her. The vicar spoke the words, and they spoke theirs, and outside a single blackbird sang in the elm trees and was quiet, and then sang again. Afterward, on the step of the church, he said her name in the low private register he used only when they were alone. Nora. She turned. His face was not composed in the way it was when the world was watching. It was simply his face, without the weight of all the management it usually performed. "I should like to show you Ashford Grange," he said. "I have not seen it. I understand the rosemary takes well in the kitchen garden." She understood, from the way he said it, that he knew about Mr. Crisp's cutting in the south window. She did not ask how. She had learned, over the past many months, that he paid attention to a great deal more than his stillness suggested. That winter they spent at Ashford Grange, in the house her father had quietly kept for her through all the years she had not known it was kept. It was smaller than Wycliffe House and slightly cold in the mornings, and had a library that smelled of old leather and needed more light. She found an agricultural pamphlet she recognized among the shelves, a particular edition her father had been fond of, and sat with it by the fire for a long time while the Marquis read at the other end of the room and the snow came down outside the long windows. Philip had been permitted to come, on account of his having asked with a gravity that had apparently settled the matter before either adult could argue with it. He was installed in the room nearest the library, and by the third day had located the natural history section of the shelves, and was working through it with the systematic intent of someone who has decided to learn a great deal before anyone notices. Nora thought about her father, who had known her well enough to hide a document behind a portrait, and trust that the right person would eventually go looking. She thought about the woman in pale green in the frame, composed and quiet, with her hands folded. She thought about all the years of managing, and how it had never been wasted. Not a single careful morning of it. Not the accounts, nor the Latin, nor the ivory ribbon. Not the long evenings in the gallery, or the early mornings in the kitchen garden. Not the stillness she had learned because the world did not reward women who were anything other than still. It counted. All of it counted. The world did not witness it, and now the most important person in this room has witnessed it, and that is enough and more than enough. She set the pamphlet down when the fire had burned low and looked across the room at the man reading at the other chair, who had looked up at almost exactly the same moment, as he had a habit of doing. "The rosemary," she said, "is in the south window of the upstairs room. I told Mr. Crisp I would report to him on how it fared." He considered this. "And how does it fare?" "Very well," she said. "The light is good." He looked at her for a moment with the expression she had spent all autumn learning, the one that existed only in rooms the world did not enter. Then he returned to his book. She returned to hers. Outside, the snow fell on Ashford Grange, on the kitchen garden and the stone walls and the lane that ran through the Wiltshire hills, and the house held them both in the specific quiet of a place that has finally been claimed by the right people. The pamphlet was open on her knee. The fire was warm. The light was good. If you have stayed until the end of this story, leave a word in the quiet below, and I will know you were here. The rosemary cutting lived in the south window for many years.